my friend Mike and me always enjoyed going on camping trips over the weekends. Our work lives were extremely stressful during the weekdays, so getting out into nature and away from the work routine on the weekends helped us relax and recharge. We lived in the Appalachian region of Virginia, a place known for its natural beauty and stunning mountain scenery, which made it easy for us to find new camping spots near the Appalachian Mountains. One Saturday, we decided to head to a new trail we hadn't tried before. The trail was only 3 miles long and led to a secluded campsite on a flatter part of the mountain. Even though we hadn't visited this specific place before, the trail reviews on Google were positive, making us think it was a well-known and good spot for camping. We packed our bags, loaded the truck with the necessary camping gear, and set off. The distance to the trailhead was about 45 minutes from our home. As we got closer, the rain started pouring heavily, which is typical in mountainous areas like this. We were used to hiking in the rain, so it wasn't bothersome enough for us to turn back. We arrived at the trailhead, which was next to the road, and saw one other car parked there. The car was new and expensive, but we expected more people given the trail's popularity. However, we were happy it wasn't crowded. As we unloaded our gear, Mike noticed that the door of the parked car was open a few inches. We looked around to see if the owner was nearby, but there were no signs of anyone. I decided to close the door, assuming the owner had left it open by mistake. The front seat was wet from the rain, but at least it wouldn't get worse. After returning to our car and grabbing our stuff, we started walking the trail. We talked about how strange it was that the door was open and how most people would have noticed that. Their car was expensive, which made the situation even stranger. As the rain picked up, we walked faster to reach the campsite and set up our tent. It took us about 2 hours to get to the end because the trail was mostly uphill. When we arrived at the site, the first thing we noticed was a tent already set up in the middle of the flat area. It was a small tent, seemingly for just one person, and we assumed the occupant was probably avoiding the rain inside it. So we decided to go to a far corner of the site and set up our tent there. After pitching our tent in the far corner of the site, we sat inside to take a break. We ate some food we had brought, began organizing our things, and dried some tools that had gotten wet from the rain. The rain was falling continuously, and the thunderous sound on the tent made it hard to hear anything else. Despite this, we started to hear faint noises from outside, but they were unclear due to the noise from the rain. After about an hour, we felt that the noises were gradually increasing. At first, we thought they might be natural sounds from wild animals, but the sound was intermittent and irregular. I decided to unzip the front of the tent to check the source of the noises. As I opened the zipper, I jumped a little when I saw 2 men crouching just a few feet from our tent. The men were wearing dark clothes and tight jeans, and they were looking at us curiously. Despite the heavy rain, it was hard not to notice that there was something strange about their appearance. We exchanged smiles and introduced ourselves. They said they were staying in the tent in the middle of the site and had been there for a few days. I quickly introduced myself and Mike and told them we were here for just one night. After exchanging greetings, the men returned to their tent. I quickly closed the zipper and went back to Mike. There were mixed feelings of worry and curiosity. The entire interaction felt strange, and they were behaving a bit unnaturally. I noticed that their tent was very small for 2 adult men, and their clothes were not suitable for the bad weather. It was obvious they were not here for camping as we were, and it didn't seem like they had been on a long hike as they claimed. We decided to leave the zipper partially open to keep an eye on them. Time passed slowly, and we didn't see any unusual movement at first. The rain continued to fall, and we listened to its eerie sounds together, exchanging worried glances. It was nearing midnight, and we felt increasingly tense. As time went by, we started to feel that there was something unnatural in the air. Darkness had completely enveloped the place, and the more the rain fell, the more mysterious the atmosphere became. The small tent in the middle was silent, as if hidden in the midst of the darkness and rain. We didn't know if we should be worried about something, but our feelings suggested something uncomfortable. Over time, the sounds we initially heard became less distinct, and we began to think that the men in the other tent might have succumbed to the harsh conditions and gone to sleep. However, I remained awake, trying to relax, but the tension never left me. The rain continued to fall steadily, and the tent shook occasionally from the strong winds. Suddenly, I felt the need to go to the bathroom, so I put on one of the cheap plastic aprons to stay as dry as possible. I quietly unzipped the tent and stepped outside, heading to a spot behind the trees near our tent. I tried to focus on any sounds or movements around us, but the rain made everything unclear. While outside, I started hearing faint noises that seemed to be getting closer. The sounds were irregular, and sometimes I heard indistinct whispers amid the raindrops. I felt a bit anxious and paranoid, so I turned in all directions to try to pinpoint the source of the sounds, but I couldn't see anything clearly. I moved behind the small tent in the middle and watched carefully. The front zipper was open, but it was difficult to see inside due to the darkness and the rain. I noticed the tent swaying unusually, as if there was movement inside. My anxiety increased, and it was hard to ignore the feeling that something strange was happening. I quickly returned to our tent and found Mike waiting anxiously. I told him what I had seen and asked if he had heard anything unusual, but he shook his head. We decided to keep a close watch on the small tent, being careful not to make any noise that might attract attention. A long time passed without anything obvious happening, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. Suddenly, I noticed the front zipper of the small tent move slightly, as if someone was trying to come out. It was very strange, given the current situation was not suitable for any outdoor activity. We looked at it with concern and decided to be ready for any emergency while staying as quiet as possible. We continued to watch in silence, and every sound from outside increased our tension. The rain was pouring heavily, and the wind was battering the tent, adding to the mystery of the situation. We were on the verge of breaking down from anxiety, and every minute felt like an hour. The situation was extremely tense, and with each passing minute, our fears grew. We waited in silence, exchanging worried glances, trying to remain as calm as possible. With the heavy rain and pitch darkness, it was hard to discern what was happening around us. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise coming from the direction of the small tent. The sound was a mix of scratching and muffled screaming. I froze in place, while Mike quickly jumped to his feet, his eyes wide with surprise. The sounds gradually increased, resembling faint screams rising with the wind. I decided to step out of our tent again to take a closer look at the small tent. I advanced with great caution, each step measured, trying to focus on the sounds coming from there. The rain was pouring down on me, but I pushed past the trees and stood a few steps away from the tent. I tried to see through the front flap, but it was hard to make out what was inside. Then, as I watched closely, I saw unusual movement inside the small tent. Someone was moving erratically, and objects were scattering randomly. A feeling of dread washed over me, and I began to wonder what could have happened. The images that came to mind were dark and frightening, but I couldn't discern the details. I went back to Mike and explained what I had seen. We were about to decide what to do when, at that moment, we heard light footsteps approaching us from behind. We froze in place and quietly told each other to be cautious. The steps were getting closer slowly, and with each step, our hearts beat faster. I looked back and saw a shadow moving between the trees. It was hard to make out its features, but it was moving toward our location. I felt a shiver run through my body, and Mike looked at me with concern. We tried to remain quiet and turned off the lights inside our tent to avoid attracting attention. We pulled the tent slightly toward a dark corner and tried to listen for any sounds coming from afar. The noises were increasing, and we felt the danger approaching. Suddenly, we heard screams coming from the small tent again, and it was clear that something unnatural was happening there. We watched cautiously, trying to decide whether we should stay in our tent or investigate the situation. The rain was pouring heavily, and all we needed were some answers to feel a bit reassured. We were on edge, and the tension was at its peak. At that moment, we realized we needed to move cautiously. We decided it might be better to approach the small tent and find out what was happening, but we didn't want to rush. We needed a clear plan to face any potential danger, hoping to understand what was going on before taking any further steps. As tension and fear escalated, we decided to move slowly towards the small tent, but we were very cautious to avoid attracting attention. We carefully exited our tent, walking slowly among the trees, trying to maintain utmost silence. As we approached the small tent, the sounds from inside grew louder. The screams intertwined with scratching noises, making the situation even more terrifying. We peeked through the front zipper of the tent, but we couldn't see anything clearly because of the darkness and rain. I tried to open the zipper gently, but our hands were trembling with anxiety. Suddenly, we heard a faint sound coming from behind, followed by a cluster of distant lights shimmering in the darkness. We quickly turned around and found that the source of the lights was a group of people wearing raincoats and shining flashlights. They were also heading towards the small tent. We avoided being in the beam of light and retreated to a safe spot behind the trees. These people gathered around the small tent, speaking in low, hushed voices. They appeared confused and exchanged bewildered looks. I moved a bit closer to eavesdrop on their conversation and managed to catch a few incomprehensible words. However, it seemed that the discussion was about an emergency situation inside the tent. Then, we decided to watch them closely. Suddenly, one person began attempting to open the front zipper of the tent. Their movements were tense and nervous, as if they were dealing with a difficult situation. After a few moments, they entered the tent, and we heard new screams coming from inside, but this time the sound was less intense. Slowly, we approached the small tent again, and when we got closer, we found that the front zipper had been closed once more, and the people inside seemed to be occupied. We decided to quickly return to our tent and try to understand the situation without risking our safety. We entered our tent, zipped it tightly, and sat in complete silence. When the rain subsided a bit, we lit a dim lantern and tried to calm our nerves. We discussed what had happened and how we could act in the future. As time passed, we began to hear new sounds coming from afar, but they were quieter. Perhaps the evacuation was over, or maybe something else was happening. At dawn, the rain began to let up, and we gradually regained our composure. We decided to leave the site before things got worse. We quickly packed our belongings, taking all necessary precautions as we departed. We returned home, hoping we had avoided a real danger. But we never forgot that mysterious and frightening night in the mountains, and the experience made us realize how fragile safety in nature can be and how an ordinary camping trip can turn into an unforgettable, terrifying experience. Before we continue, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel and share the video so we can continue creating more stories. Camping has always been my favorite hobby, and I enjoy spending weekends with my friends exploring nature. One summer day, my friends Samir, Layla, Rami, and I decided to go on a camping trip to a remote forest area on the outskirts of a small town called Prineville. We prepared well, took our tents, gear, and food, and started the trip on a Saturday morning. The drive took about 2 hours, and as we approached the camping site, the sky began to fill with clouds. Upon arrival, we found a suitable spot among the tall trees and quickly set up our tents before lighting a fire to prepare food. While we were having dinner around the fire, we noticed unusual sounds coming from deep within the forest, like faint whispers and the soft sound of footsteps. As the night progressed, the wind started blowing stronger, and we noticed strange lights twinkling between the trees. We approached them cautiously, but the lights suddenly disappeared, and we couldn't determine their source. We returned to the camp and talked about the lights and their mystery, but we decided to try to relax and sleep. At midnight, I woke up to the sound of light knocks on the wall of my tent. I slowly opened my eyes and saw a strange person standing near the camp. They were wearing dark, tattered clothes, and their face was covered by a hood. I panicked and ran to my friends, telling them what I saw. But when they went out, there was no trace of that person. We decided to stay cautious and remain in the camp. The next morning, we started packing our belongings to prepare for the return trip. As we were loading items into the car, we heard the sounds of car engines approaching. I looked outside and saw several cars parked at a short distance, with people dressed in dark clothes who appeared to be armed. We began to panic when we realized these men were bandits. We didn't have much time to think, so we quickly got into the car and started driving on the winding road. We used high beams and mirrors to track their movements, but they were closing in on us quickly. We reached a point on the road where we had to make a quick decision, either continue on the main road or try to escape via a side road. We decided to take the side road, hoping we could get away. The side road was narrow and rough, making driving difficult. While driving on the side road, we lost control of the car for a while due to the steep slopes, but we regained control and continued on. As we sped down the slopes, we could hear the bandits' cars getting closer. In a state of chaos, we decided to follow an unpaved road leading to an open area, hoping to evade the chase. After driving a long distance, we finally felt that the cars had stopped chasing us. When we reached a safer area, we pulled into a gas station on the main road, where we took a deep breath and began to regain our composure. We didn't know who those people were or what they were planning, but we were grateful to have survived that terrifying experience. We returned to the city, realizing that the adventure had been a harsh lesson in dealing with unexpected situations. It was a frightening experience, but it taught us the importance of caution and being prepared for any emergency while camping.